Hi, Anne Marie. Good morning. Happy Labor
Good,
Day.
good morning. Happy Labor Day. I mean, is it Labor Day? Who's to say?
What day is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Everything just looks the same. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Holly. This is my partner, Anne Marie. You're here. You probably already know that because you found us on our YouTube channel at Story and Printing. So today we kind of want to talk about your origin story. And this is something that we delve into in training quite a bit. Typically I think, Anne Marie, people think of your origin story as like where you came from, right? Which is a form of an origin story,
For
absolutely,
sure.
and can be very useful. And frankly, is important to, it's important to know your own origin story to make sense of how you make sense of the world
Yeah.
around you. But there are lots of other ways in, right, in a professional setting, thinking about the types of origin stories that can be useful. So talk to me a little bit about, how people can kind of find their way into an origin story that they can use for, leadership purposes or in coaching or in giving feedback to someone. How do they get into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. You're an origin story. You and I use that a lot. We both came from a culture of poverty. We talk about that because I think context matters. And I think, where you came from, there's an opportunity for what I call like narrative vulnerability. It's this opportunity to share a story that reveals something about you. It builds sort of inherent trust. It creates kind of connectivity, which I think is really important, particularly if it's not exploitive and done in a really honest, authentic, genuine way.
Right, right.
There are other stories too, however, when we're looking at your professional history. I think things like the very first job you ever had is a really interesting thing to think about. Did you work as a teenager? And if you did, what was that first job? Was it
Yeah.
delivering newspapers? Was it scooping ice cream? And what did you learn from that? That's a really powerful thing. What did you do with your very first check? I think that's an interesting origin story. Were
Yeah.
you used to having money? Was it new to have money? Did you save it? Did you spend it? That reveals something about who you are or who you were and who you've become. So those kinds of things, your first boss, the toughest lesson you ever learned,
Yeah.
if you were ever fired, that story can be really important.
Right.
I think those kinds of stories are ways to say something about your own beginning. When you think about the work you currently do, usually not always, but usually there's a person connected to it. Who told you that you were good at this, that you
Mhm.
could do this kind of work? Who encouraged you? Who gave you opportunity? That's where all of your rich origin stories are. And there are many of them as I'm throwing out these prompts. You should have a story for each of those things. And when you're doing a presentation, when you're coaching, when you're leading, when you're being interviewed for something, returning to that origin story is incredibly powerful because it tells some people something about who you are and where you came from and what
Yeah.
matters to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm sitting here, putting myself in we eat and breathe this, right? So story is like our thing. But there are a lot of people I think who might be watching who would go like, okay, yeah. I remember my first paycheck, I spent it on a pair of Doc Martens or whatever, and then they'd like leave it, right? So talk to me a little bit about being really prepared to use these stories and like diving in. So it's one thing to have the idea of the anecdote in your head,
Yeah.
right? Like my first job was working at a restaurant or whatever.
Yep.
But how do you ask yourselves, like, how do you tease out detail that's going to be rich and useful in a variety of settings?
Such an excellent question. Let's take the Doc Martens example. So you get your first, you could say like my very first paycheck, I was working at the mall at, insert a story or insert a name of a retailer. And I wanted Doc Martens. I wanted Doc Martens for 18 months. Now we have time. And we also have desire. We've elongated the desire. For 2 years, I wanted these, but my parents wouldn't buy them for me, right? Now that tells us something about who you are. You had to go out and create your own money to get what you wanted, right? Talk about how long it took you. How many checks did you have to, was it your first check? Was it your second? Talk about that experience of walking to the store. What did it feel like? What did it feel like to put that money down on the counter? What did it feel like to walk out with that box? What did it feel like the first time you wore them? Breaking that down into smaller bits of scenes, really, that's what it is. It's scenes. You get the check. Like back in the day, we didn't have direct deposit, kids.
No,
You got a
they were
piece of
like,
paper about
here
it.
it is.
Yeah, and going to the bank and depositing that check. When you break it down into scenes, what it does for you is that creates your narrative arc. Now, you've got to be careful. This can't be a 45-minute story. So you've got to be able to break it down in scenes and do that in an economical amount of time. But that's a way, when you think about the moment to moment, then what happened? Then what happened? What happened next? How did that feel? What was the salesperson like? Did they have your right size? Did they have all of those kinds of elements sort of come together to really create the story itself? It's, to your point, it's not the anecdote. I got my first check and I bought a pair of Doc Martens. That doesn't tell us anything about who you are. Why did you want them? Did you live in a school? Did you go to a school that was super conservative, or contrary, did you go to a super, you know, sophisticated urban school with lots of different kinds of people and lots of diversity? Who did you, how did you see yourself then? And what was the purchase of those Doc Martens going to buy you as a person? That's when you change the context and contour of the narrative.
Yeah. And I think just from a practical standpoint, I mean, some people are able to do this in a very, you know, inward cerebral fashion, but I'm a big fan of just like having a notebook and writing it down, right? And just jotting, just free writing for a couple of minutes to really get yourself going. And capture some of those details, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, I like the Doc Marten story, great, I'll tell that in this context, right? Like, because we always also say, like, you never, in front of a big crowd, you never want to tell a story for the first time that you've never told, right?
Please don't, please don't.
Don't do it.
Prepare appropriately. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your audience, and don't do that to yourself.
Yes, yeah. If you're watching this, if this speaks to you, if you have any questions, what a response to this, let us know. Comment on this video. Reach out to us. You can find all of our information on storyandprinting.com. We love talking about this stuff and doing a lot of training on on how to tap into stories in this very type of way. And so we hope that you have enjoyed this. And my friend Anne Marie, I hope you have a lovely Monday.
You too, friend. See you soon.
See you soon.